Deep Sea Podcast, a punk take on a science podcast about everything deep sea. I'm Dr. Thomas Lindley. With me is the Professor, Alan Jameson. Hello, mate. You're cooking in a room.
I am. I'm feeling somewhat disenfranchised.
Are you cooking emotionally as well?
Yes.
It's not just the hot Australian room.
Yeah, hot on the outside and the inside.
So, welcome to episode 40, in honour of us both being in our 40s now, as of the last celebration. We've had more episodes than 40. We just didn't number some of them because they were just too silly to even be worthy of a number.
But what are the chances of episode 40 falling upon the 10 years where we can say we're in our 40s? In fact, you're younger than me, so we've probably got like a 15-year window where episode 40 had to fall for this to be an interesting segue.
Exactly. I'm not reaching. Like this is a totally valid episode theme.
Right.
We only had a 4-year window.
Yeah.
Before we get into the show, thank you again for more of our patrons. So these people have joined their Patreon and we'll look forward to seeing them on the Discord in the future. So Julian Moore, Julie Burwald, Karen Pratt, and Susan Casey, which I assume is the Susan Casey, author friend.
The Susan Casey, the one and only.
The Susan Casey. And thank you to anyone who bought merch, gave us a review, did all the lovely things that can help the show.
I've got some news about merch.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. I can't find my Deep Sea Podcast apron.
What?
I don't know. I just don't know where it is.
Well, last time I saw it, a skeleton was wearing it.
Oh, no, because I didn't buy that one. I had my own one. I must admit, I don't do baking very often, if ever. But for some reason, I can't remember why. I said, why don't you use the Deep Sea Podcast apron? And then I couldn't find it. That is the story. I'm milking this for quite a long time, but that's it. I've lost my apron.
It was there somewhere.
Well, I looked for it for about, I don't know, let's say somewhere between 2 and 3 minutes, and then gave up, and that's it.
And then lost interest.
Yeah, just like boring.
Cool story, bro.
Thanks, mate.
It's not like lots of other really interesting stuff has been going on right now coming out of your lab.
I know. It's getting a bit weird, eh?
Yeah, let's focus on the apron, eh? Not the amazing octopus footage or the
Well, that was good, wasn't it?
mystery little critter that floated past.
Yeah, so there's two things. One is the little weirdy thing that floated past. Now, this is something that was in the sub-video from the dive I did last year to 9,150 meters at the Triple Junction in Japan. And I've got a guy here who's looking through the videos, and he said, what's that? And I'm like, I don't know, never seen anything like it. And then it turns out I took 3 pictures of it on my iPhone. So I have seen it before because I take pictures of it.
And it was wearing your apron.
But it was there just as the sub landed at the bottom. And so it was something that it's not necessarily a swimmer. There's a good chance we just sort of bow waved it up off the bottom and it was just gliding back down. But then when you get these floaty, white, translucent deep sea things, you're like, it's probably an actinian or something like that. And the more you look at it, the more you're like, no, it's not. This is something with bilateral symmetries. And then I started thinking that looks a lot like a nudibranch, which are sea slugs. But I happen to know that the deepest sea slug ever recorded is about 4,100 meters. So this is significantly deeper than all, like twice as deep, if not more, than all previous nudibranchs. So I asked a few people, and everyone kind of went, I don't know, kind of looks like a nudibranch, but it's very deep. And a lot of people said they never seen anything quite like it. And so I put it on Twitter. Finally used social media for good and drew a blank. So it was really unhelpful. Chris Smart said it has mollusk vibes, which is the closest to it could be a nudibranch. So anyway, that was that. And the other thing,
I had sort of flashed it around this end as well. Like, why were people ruling out sort of sea pig style holothurian?
It's nothing like any of the holothurians that we've seen. I think it's a nudibranch. I honestly do. So that was weird. Another one was, obviously we just finished a big 12-week Trans-Pacific fandango. The folk here have been going through the video. So we've been trying to do this thing where we're doing all the data analysis semi-live, just doing it on the ship. So the idea was by the time we get off the ship, it's all done. And there was a couple of deployments left to do, and it was on the very last one out of 91 lander drops I think we did. And there's a big eye jellyhead. I'm not sure if that's a real common name or not, but that's what it was referred to somewhere, and I thought, that'll do. And it's a Cerateuthidea, and it's just this amazing octopus that inflates its webbing and then sort of hops across the seafloor, just inflating itself like a circus tent and then deflating to become a normal octopus and then inflating again. And it's the most peculiar thing.
It makes a lot of sense, doesn't it? That it's almost being a net and something will panic if it happens to cover over it.
It's how stretchy it is as well, and where does all that webbing go when it retracts it? It just seems to sort of almost disappear. It's really odd to watch it. And it's also 4,800 and something meters deep, so it's, even by octopus standard, it's out there, And so that was quite a big win. And it was cool because of the 91 landers, the very first dive was that one we saw the beautiful lizardfish. And then we didn't see anything particularly interesting for a long long, long time. And then on the very last one, which was actually very close to where the lizardfish was, there was a great big octopus. So that was cool. I enjoyed that. And it absolutely creamed it in on Twitter.
It really did. It was up to 1.5 million, I think, views when I saw it.
Yeah, something like that, yeah.
It is an amazing video. We will put a link to it because it is amazing. Just watching this thing bounce along, deploy its net, and then fold up again and bounce along again.
Another weird thing happened this week.
Mm-hmm.
So a guy came around to visit the lab recently. This guy called Chairman Wang from Beijing, and he's a guy who has done lots of interesting things, like go up to the top of Mount Everest, and he's probably done the whatever X number of summits, and he's done all sorts of stuff. And he was also recently down in the Mariana Trench in the Chinese sub. So him and another guy came a week apart, and they'd both done Mariana Trench, and they came to say hello and so on. And they saw my book on the shelf, and they were talking about it. He says, "Oh, we read that when we were on our expedition." I was like, "That's cool." And then I suddenly thought, "Oh, wait a minute. Do you know I've got a Chinese translation of that in a hardback-bound book?" And he's like, "Oh." And of course, I don't need 5 copies of my book in Chinese. I don't really need 1 copy of my book in Chinese, to be fair. So I gave him a copy of it, and he was ever so grateful. And he's like, "Oh, this is really cool." And then off he went. Before he left, he said he was away up to Tibet to go up some mountain. And the other day, he sent me a photograph of him near the summit of a mountain called Cho Oyu, which is the 6th highest in the world, 8,188 meters, having a cup of tea with my book. How surreal is that?
Yeah, that's really cute.
Yeah, he's quite a character he was, but yeah.
He sounds it. I like that these people just wander through your office.
Well, I think it's weird that if you're going to go to do a mountain climb to the 6th highest peak in the world, that you take a hardback copy of my book with you. I thought every gram counted on these things, but apparently not.
Because there is a softback one, because that's the one you gave me. I've got a soft.
I could give him a PDF, would be lighter to carry. Put it on your phone.
It's not the same. Not the same.
I know. No, that's cool. It's nice that my book's managed to reach 8,000 meters high.
Very cool. I've just had the regularly weird museum-y time. I helped move a sperm whale skull yesterday.
Ooh.
Because that's a normal thing.
When you say help move it, did you just push the trolley?
They're really heavy. There was a forklift involved. I just helped guide it. There was massive fronds of kelp covered in light bulbs in our freezer for a while. And then I interviewed someone about their flesh-eating beetle colony. So it's boring in the museum. Every day's the same.
Fronds, eh? With light bulbs on.
Big fronds with light bulbs on. It was an art, and it was really good. Actually, I saw it when it was installed.
I'm going to say you're going to have to elaborate on this one. You can't just throw out a frond with a light bulb on it.
There's a new exhibit. I think it's called This Swaying Earth. So it's lots of art inspired by nature, and you just round this corner, and you suddenly find yourself in a kelp forest with all these lights in it, but they're like chintzy sort of grandma's style lamps embedded in these huge kelp fronds. It's very cool, and you just walk around this corner and it's there.
Ooh.
So yeah, that was living in our freezer for a while to make sure it was sterile. There wasn't any beasties in it, and now it's up on the museum.
Very good.
It was cool.
Yeah,
good day out. We had some newsy bits. It's been a busy month, actually, it feels. I'm not sure if it's because we fell a bit behind, but there's been lots of newsy things. The ones that caught my eye initially were, it's been a great month for fish smashing their faces into the seabed.
Good.
And it turns out they've been doing it for ages. So a little bit of local research from the abyssal plains around here in New Zealand. There's a little sort of group of rat tails called Coelurhynchus, which I realize I've been saying wrong. I've been saying Coelurhynchus, but it's one of those Latin things. So Coelurhynchus, they've got these big pointy snouts. They're quite pretty looking fish, really. And a team from Niue have managed to marry up these weird horseshoe-shaped dents in the seabed with these very particular fish head shapes, and they can even tell the species apart, and they can even back calculate how long these animals were based on these little feeding traces that they leave in the seabed. So they just kind of smash their face into the seabed and take up a little plug of sediment, and it leaves such a perfect imprint of the fish's face. It's like those little games you used to get, you know, that pin thing where you push your face into it, it leaves an imprint.
Yes.
Fish doing that basically with their faces. So that was really interesting. Got to the bottom of the mystery of these weird patterns, and then me and you helped out some paleontologists with an interesting paper. So in Italy, there is some Cretaceous era abyssal seabed preserved. It was smothered by a turbidite, which is like we've talked about them before, it's like an avalanche in the deep sea, basically, so it gets smothered in sediment. And the conditions weren't right to preserve the animals' bodies, but it did preserve their burrows and tracks in the seabed, which is the lovely German word Lebensspuren that we've talked about before, which means life traces. So we helped the team by providing some examples of modern deep sea traces to see if we could match up the things that they're seeing to a known animal. And some of the traces looked a lot like fish feeding pits. And if that's the case, then this is the earliest evidence of fish living in the deep sea. And we got to do cool things like drag chimera teeth through clay to see what sort of shape they make if they were scraping in the mud. Yeah, and it was a fun project, and that got some traction as well.
Yep.
Another ye olde paleo one, research team out of Göttingen.
That sounded very Scandinavian. Well done.
I don't know. I don't know how to read the dotty ones. Has provided the first fossil evidence for higher invertebrates in the deep sea floor, so 104 million years ago. So basically they were looking at deep boreholes in the Pacific, Atlantic and Southern Ocean from water depths, well, water that would have been 200 to 4,700 meters deep, and just found lots of fragments of spines, which were basically sea urchin spines, which I'd never heard called the irregular echonoids before. I quite like that. It's a good band name, the irregular echonoids.
It sounds like something from Doctor Who.
But it implies that there's the regular echonoids out there as well, and then there's this sort of like punk anti-establishment.
Do you reckon the regular echonoids and the irregular echonoids are at war?
Yeah. Oh, like the Dalek Civil War.
Yeah.
I can do a whole podcast on that if we want to go into it.
Oh, we should do, yeah.
That's important. It's important to know our history. And learn from it. There is a company that's appeared in the southwest of the UK announcing plans to construct modular subsea habitats, allowing people to live underwater for up to 28 days, 200 meters depth. This kind of came out the blue. We'd heard some whisperings of, people we know and technology going on in that part of the country, but then this project suddenly appeared, and it looks very flash. It looks like a sort of Google campus style thing.
People have been talking about this for a long time though. Is this real?
Well, I don't know. It's one of those things where like how much of this is there and how much is sort of render.
The whole underwater habitat thing, I'm not entirely convinced about this, but that's fine. If some people want to do that, that's fine.
I'd do it if I got the chance.
I'd rather go to a jazz bar in New Orleans for 28 days.
Fair enough. Magnetic bacteria have been found in the deep sea. And I just wanted to include this story because all of these words are amazing. It's just full of these words I've never heard before. So magnetotactic bacteria align themselves with the Earth's magnetic field using their magnetosomes. So they're iron crystals wrapped in a membrane. They're known from the fossil record, where they're known as magnetofossils. It's got such a brand to it. This is such good branding. And they inform us about the past shifts in the Earth's magnetic field. We know about them on land and in shallow water, but this is the first time they were found in the deep sea and around hydrothermal vents, which is interesting. And just to round it off with more great names, they were collected by HYPER-DOLHPIN, written all in caps, which is an ROV. Using a magnet.
Yeah, HYPER-DOLHPIN's the Japanese ROV. That's been going around for a while. I've never met anyone who can explain to me why it's called HYPER-DOLHPIN.
And it's all in caps. It's like, is it an acronym?
Yeah, no. Is it a particularly excitable dolphin?
Why can I hear the sound of the beam it would fire? I've been watching some like Godzilla-style monster films, and I feel like that would fire a beam.
Yeah.
One of the ones that goes beep. Yeah. And then there's a big explosion. That's what HYPER-DOLHPIN sounds like.
Yeah, definitely.
It's not a deep sea story really, but just some interesting little bit of research on learning in jellyfish. I know me and Heather in an episode way back were talking about deep sea sponges moving. How does a whole animal with no nervous system decide to move in a particular way? And so working with the Caribbean box jellyfish, tiny little jellyfish that actually lives in a complex environment. It lives in mangroves, and they were able to train them to avoid obstacles and manage to sort of figure out how that learning happened. So they don't have a central brain, but they do have visual sensory centers called rhopalium, which seem to be where that learning happens. So I thought that was very cool. Interesting when simple systems can produce complex behavior.
Is there any way to weaponize that?
Of course. We'll put it on HYPER-DOLHPIN.
Yeah. Beep. Oh no, he's firing his rhopalium beam.
He's calling the jellyfish. All the jellyfish are pointing towards us using a magneto.
Yeah, he's charging his rhopalium array, and it's going to fire a whole bunch of magnetotactic missiles at us.
Oh, it's great. All this would just sound perfectly normal in Evangelion. This all makes perfect sense. And then the last one I thought was quite cool was DNA from filter feeding sponges reveals a deep sea fish community. So filter feeders trap all sorts of biological matter, mucus and shed cells and all sorts of bits and pieces. So the new study uses sponges essentially like eDNA samplers, so collecting DNA from the environment, and they were able to get information about the fish living in the area despite not seeing them directly. And other animals actually seem to make great sampling devices. We get a lot of amazing and rare fish specimens from the stomachs of ice fish, and so there's a lot of records that are only found thanks to ice fish vomiting when they're caught. They're not known from any other records.
Nice.
So using animals as sampling devices is interesting. That's it. That's the news. Anyway, we're under pressure from the Discord to have a live watch along of Twilight because of the smelly man who punches seagulls.
I'm up for it, but I can't say I'm going to enjoy it, but I think that's why they want me to do it, because people are so bored now that they just want to watch me watching Twilight.
Be unhappy.
Me just whinging over the top of it about smelly man.
Can we not do the lighthouse? That is it. That is how we got onto this topic.
No, the lighthouse Nah, I think I need to see Twilight. I've never seen any Harry Potter movies either and stuff like that. So, this is part of my education. Stupid films with smelly people in. Is Harry Potter smelly or is he clean?
I mean, he did some grittier roles after where he looks like he might be a bit smelly.
Okay.
He did some really good stuff as well. He did Dirk Gently Holistic Detective, which had a weird Doctor Who feel to it, based on the Douglas Adams novel, which it didn't get much traction, but I thought it was fantastic. Certainly the first series.
Never heard of it. No, I want to do Twilight because it's got vampires in it. Moody vampires.
You won't like it.
Why not? Is it all about love and blood, crying and emotions?
Well, I find it problematic because it's not healthy relationship examples. It's very self-destructive, but yes, it is about sparkling and love and looking at each other all intense and frankly stalker-esque, dangerous behavior passed off as romantic. But that's all romantic comedies, isn't it?
Do they end up together forever in the end?
Well, of course.
Spoiler.
Yeah. Well, you've got to brace yourself for the rapidly aging CGI baby and the weird pedophilic thing that comes out of that.
What? I thought this was about vampires.
Yeah. Oh, you're in for a ride, mate.
Oh, all right. Let's bring it on. Well, thinking about the film Twilight is a phrase that's often used to describe the top 1,000 meters of sea, the twilight zone, the area of the deep sea, which has got a little bit of light, not too much, not too little. What else? This is ridiculous.
This is shaky, but It does let us talk about the fact that we found an extra midnight zone.
All right, let's talk about the extra midnight zone. So the twilight zone kind of works. It's a name for part of the ocean because it is actually in twilight, but the midnight zone is the one that does my nine because it's stupid. What do you call the waters that are deeper than that and actually technically are darker than that because there's less animals, therefore there's less bioluminescence and there's absolutely no sunlight. So and it turns out Tom found some sort of graphic in a book that had, was it extra midnight zone?
Yeah, or was it the deep midnight zone, the deeper midnight zone? It was
stupid.
A kid's educational sort of thing, and I've never seen that written before. I've never seen the deeper midnight zone. And then just to bait you, Andrew sent you a picture of a kid's book called A Place Called Midnight.
Oh. Anyway, I do have a bit of a confession or an apology to make. Actually,
this is barnacles. Did we not talk about this on the last one? Just in case we didn't.
No, we didn't. This is a heartfelt public announcement directed towards Captain Barnacles, and I do owe you an apology. I believe it might not be you who came up with this stupid, dumb term of midnight zone. One of my kids brought home a book from school called Oceans. It's one of these flimsy little books with big writing and pictures of turtles in it. And it had a deep sea bit, and it did use the phrase a midnight zone, and it was published 2 years before Captain Barnacle started banging on about it. So maybe it wasn't Barnacle. I mean, don't get me wrong, I still hate Barnacles.
Still got beef. Still got celebrity beef with Barnacles.
Celebrity beef with Barnacles. So this is not really working as an apology because I'm still saying I hate you.
You still turned on him quite quickly. You really hate him, but maybe it wasn't about this. Maybe you just needed an excuse.
I still hate you, polar bear, but not for this.
Fight me, polar bear. Fight me.
Yeah. So maybe the midnight zone is not, but it didn't say, it obviously didn't source where it was getting its information from. So as far as I'm concerned, Barnacles is still getting it. Anyway, let's move on. So the Twilight Zone, top 1,000 meters, which is also in the benthic part of the Twilight Zone, is where you'd find the blobfish that we've just been discussing. And I'm sure there are pricklefish there as well. And the other thing that's in the top 1,000 meters is some features upon the continental shelf. Now, Tom, let's start thinking about what features are there within the continental shelf.
Well, surely it's just a big old boring shelf and it's all flat.
A shelf with china plates on it that your grandmother has. Just a big brick of a shelf. Solid.
Surely there's not big, interesting cracks in it that are quite often associated with a big river on land. So it's almost like the river continues into the deep sea and carves these beautiful paths that really mix up the habitat.
But if there was, we would have spoke about that when we did that whole arc about all the different types of deep sea habitats. So surely it must be one of them. Or
well, either they've just been discovered this last month, or people are really busy and they can't always talk to. Like we pick a theme, but it doesn't mean that people are available to talk during that theme. Turns out scientists are busy and go away a lot.
Yeah, let's talk about submarine canyons.
I'm joined by Teresa Amaro, a deep-sea ecologist currently based at the Department of Biology at the University of Aveiro. Her research interests cover trophic ecology of different deep-sea ecosystems, and that includes, and what we're going to focus on today, is submarine canyons, but you also dabble in abyssal plains and seamounts and contrasting ocean basins. Thanks for coming to have a chat with us.
Thank you for inviting me.
We've been trying to cover the different deep-sea habitats because there's the idea that the deep sea is just this big open space that's pretty boring. And to be fair, a lot of the abyssal plain is, but there's a few key habitats in there. So I wanted to start by putting canyons into context. So we have like the continental slope where the land transitions into the abyssal plain. So we have this long slope. But what specifically is a canyon? What sets it apart from the more regular slope?
I normally, whenever I talk to people, I normally tell them to spot the Grand Canyon in the US and then put that image underwater. And I think then people will understand. And I think it's a very good description of what a canyon might look like.
Yeah, it's an easily accessible one.
Yeah.
Are they, I mean, like the Grand Canyon, do they tend to be associated with rivers?
Yes. Although one of my favorite canyon, the Nazaré Canyon, is not.
Oh.
So in Portugal, for instance, you have the Lisbon Canyon and the Setúbal Canyon, and they are associated with rivers. But the Nazaré Canyon, which is a little bit north of Lisbon, is not. So you can have both type of canyons.
And is the river-based ones the most common type?
I think it is because, as you can imagine, you have like a very big influence of a river and the currents, and then along the time, this can be transformed into a canyon. But, for instance, you have the Whitard Canyon that is not associated with lands. It's not associated with a river. And it's like in the middle of the ocean. And then all of a sudden, you have a canyon. So it has been in the past, but then it's not anymore.
Oh, okay.
But the Nazaré Canyon is like a huge cliff. And sometimes the canyon, takes some kilometers to actually really start. But you have then some canyons like Nazaré Canyon that starts immediately at 0 meters. So if you see it from land, you see a huge cliff. And then, it starts immediately from, like I say, from 0 to 6,000 meters depth.
Wow. And that must really give different properties, because if they're sort of created by a river, if they're almost an extension of an estuary, there's lots of material coming in from the land as well. Yeah. And it's sort of quite a slope. And then it sounds like there's another type of canyons that used to be formed from rivers, or maybe formed just as clefts in the Earth's crust. And they must have really different properties.
Yes, but for instance, Nazaré Canyon, you have a deposition of organic matter, so this material. And if you studied those walls and the terrains that you have there, it's actually, the material is really rich with the terrestrial input. So it's absolutely right what you say. But in the Nazaré Canyon, you also find these things. And I think at the moment I cannot really compare, for instance, between the Nazaré Canyon and the Lisbon Canyon or the Setúbal, which has river input. But I think the Nazaré Canyon in terms of organic matter is enriched, and it's fresher than the Lisbon Canyon, for instance, where you have a river. So the reason for that, I don't know. I think it has to be with the currents, and it has to be with the oceanographic features, that you have in there. But especially that canyon, which is the canyon that I actually know the most, the organic material is really enriched and until very deep.
Which makes sense why it's a good place to live.
Yeah.
Yeah. We'll get on to the animals in a second. Is there actually a definition of a canyon? Because, of course, the seabed's pretty varied. Is there a point where a cleft or a crack in the Earth's crust becomes a canyon?
Yeah, I think you can define as submarine canyons are deep, large-scale incisions that can occur on the continental shelf. Yeah, and I think they can exist in all ocean margins. And these landforms, serve as a preferential particle transport conduit, of organic material that can connect then the coast with the deep sea.
So we know that the abyssal plains on the whole are a very static and low energy environment. And that's why this input will be incredibly important. So what are the ways, other than having more organic material in them, what are other ways that the canyons differ from the open plains that surround them?
I know that abyssal plains normally, they are not rich in organic matter, and they are really dependent on what's happening in the shallow water, like the spring blooms, for instance, and then they are completely dependent on the degradation of organic matter that falls from shallow water all the way to the abyssal plain. Whereas canyons, if there is a transport of something that comes from land, then it helps, the formation of the canyon, it really helps to transport the material into the deep sea. So if you see the structure, it's like a river, right? And then it helps to transport this material to the deep sea, and then of course it helps to feed the animals or the organisms that exist there.
And sometimes there can be quite dramatic sediment flows, so it's almost too much of a good thing for the animals that live there. There are these huge turbidity events which are like a mudslide down the canyons.
Exactly.
There's also some unusual currents that take place around canyons. I forget where I was. It was somewhere in the Bay of Biscay, I think it was. But there's flushing events where there'll be a huge movement of water mass, not just the sediment moving down, but actually some of the strongest currents we've measured, aren't they?
Yeah, I imagine like a snowball, that comes all the way, from the canyon, then it decreases, in volume, and then it just goes down until it finds a terrain. But yes, and also then if you have these turbidity events, then they are actually perfect for the fauna there. Well, sometimes.
As long as they're not too close.
Yeah, as you can imagine, if like the snowball or these turbidity events, if they are like too strong, they can damage all those animals, that are living on top.
Or smother if they're fixed.
Yeah, exactly. And then it will be very bad for them. But then it will help others afterwards.
Yeah. Do they have much in common with the Hadal trenches? A lot of this is similar. It's another abyssal adjacent habitat whereas the abyssal zone is quite static and you end up with long-lived animals that eke by on very little food. And then you have this dynamic environment next to it where there is an abundance of food. So the animals tend to have a higher generation time because every now and then there'll be a catastrophic event that'll wipe out a large part of their population, so they reproduce more quickly to bounce back after one of those events. Is there a similar thing there?
Yeah, exactly like that. Yes. I don't know much about trenches, but I can imagine that in a trench, whenever you have these events, it drags all the food down, right? And then in canyons, I think the steep of these slopes can be a bit less than trenches. But then if you imagine a river, right, underwater and with a slight inclination, which keeps the material being dragged and until it finds a terrain, one can be deposit. You really have to imagine like a river going, slowly, most of the times, going down. Whereas what I see on a trench, and I might be wrong, I think that it can be steeper so that the material can be deposited quicker, I think.
Yeah, they tend to be in the abyssal plains, and so they don't have that direct flow, like if there's a river. So there's not material coming from one end, but it does act like a funnel, and then every now and then we get the seismic events, so a tremor that will almost shake all the material into the trench. So it ends up enriched next to the abyssal zones next to it, which are more sort of food impoverished. So maybe similar to the trenches then, this is quite a different environment than either of the adjacent ones, than that of the continental slope or the abyssal plains. Are there canyon specialist species? Are there species that really thrive there and that are maybe only found in canyons?
Yeah, there are a lot of endemic species. But as you know, by being a deep sea researcher, you know that we also do not know a lot about the deep sea. And we are still finding more and more deep sea fauna, let's say. So yes, I would call it that there are special organisms living there. But I also tend to, although I know that in lots of papers it's written that they are endemic, for instance, but I tend to also to think that because we don't know a lot about the deep sea, I'm not so sure if we would find these fauna, for instance, elsewhere.
No, definitely. We have a tendency within the deep sea community, at least, to have a lot of biodiversity hotspots and a lot of endemism that really might just be, well, we've only got one sample. So by definition, it's a hotspot and an endemic species.
Yeah.
Without sort of saying that they have to live in the canyons, what sort of animals do you find there in abundance? What are doing particularly well in them?
So, for instance, deep sea cucumbers, holothurians, they live great in a canyon. They are like the first ones to appear whenever there is a organic matter event, deposition event. and they act like they are vacuum cleaners, they just wipe out all the fresh organic matter, and then it gives space to the other fauna to interact. So for instance, holothurians in abyssal plain, they are not there, and suddenly they appear.
They've been hiding somewhere.
Yeah, we still don't understand from where they are coming from. I give you like 2 examples. So if you go to the Nazaré Canyon, 3,500 meters, you see a very high deposition of holothurians there. And then I studied the place, and it's, at that time, the material was fresh, and I could really prove, that the holothurians at that time, they were feeding from fresh organic matter. Whereas if you go to the Withered Canyon, I visit the place several times along different depths, and I found out that suddenly the holothurians were there. And then you go if you go shallower or deeper, they were not there anymore. And so I was like, wow, why? Is it because it's like the perfect place to have a deposit, of organic matter or not? I don't know. And then these holothurians, I immediately start thinking, how come, what do they eat? And then I hypothesized that whenever the fresh material is there, they prefer, this fresh organic material. And I could really see, because I look into the guts, I could really see that these holothurians were eating fresh material, and this fresh material being degraded along the gut. And also in the Nazaré Canyon, I look at the feces content, and I could really, connect, the degradation of fresh degraded material. But then you also see that whenever holothurians do not have fresh material, they can also survive with very old material. So coming from, for instance, bacteria. So I cannot understand, if I put it that way, how they survive and why you have nothing there and suddenly it appears.
How are so many ready? Where are they when they're not there?
Yeah.
Is this a swimming species?
So in the Nazaré Canyon, they were not. So they were living under the sediment, whereas the species that I found, the holothurians that I found in the Withered, they were swimming. Yeah, and then I found out by a paper with Fabio De Leo that you have the same species in the canyon you have in New Zealand, the Kaikoura Canyon.
Oh.
So there is a very big similarity in terms of these holothurians and these canyons, although the canyons are totally different, but the species is the same. So they live under the sediment. One of the questions that I really wanted to look at was actually to go to New Zealand and have a look at the Kaikoura Canyon and to see how different or how similar it is from the Nazaré Canyon, because the holothurians are there, it's the same species, but I never had the chance to look at the organic matter from the Kaikoura Canyon.
We should keep in touch. I might be able to help with that.
Yes, please. Definitely. Because, for instance, in the Nazaré Canyon, I really wanted to have the feces intact because, so you had the holothurian, you had the gut. So I collected the sediment, and then I collected the holothurian. And so I dissect the gut, and then I look at the organic material in the beginning, middle, and the end. And then I had to have the feces intact. So together with Ben Burman that worked at the NOC.
Oh, yeah.
We built a poo collector, which was really great. So I said to Ben that I really needed to have a device that would allow me to collect poo from the holothurians, because to collect the poo straight from the sediment, it would have been contaminated, by the sediment. So we created a poo collector. So we put holothurians, we had little devices, and then with an ROV, we put the holothurians in each plate. We let it be for 3 to 4 days. So each holothurian had a kind of a funnel, and then whenever they would release the poo, it would fall into a vial. And then whenever we arrived there to collect the device, we just shut the vial so it could not be, contaminated.
So part sediment trap, part music festival toilet.
Yeah, exactly. But it was a sediment trap with only Holothurian poo. You know what I mean? So, but yes, it's the same effect. And then it was really nice because you could see that the Holothurian, the gut, was completely empty.
You knew you had it.
Yeah, my objective was perfectly fulfilled. I managed to collect the feces, and then I had a perfect connection. I had the sediment, I had the Holothurian gut, and then the feces. So I could perfectly study which kind of material these Holothurians were eating, and if there would be a degradation along the gut.
So these are detritivores. They're living on the soft sediment at the bottom that is sort of cascading down.
Yeah.
There's going to be rocky sides as well, though. What are sort of the animals we find there? We find filter feeders there.
Like corals. And although I've never had a chance to study them in the deep sea, sponges, of course, they exist there as well. But for instance, in the abyssal plain, and now relating to the research I'm doing at the moment, they exist in there, in the abyssal plain, but I've never had a chance to study them.
So there's multiple environments there. There's these rocky sides and then the sediment at the bottom, but it's a really complex environment. There's a lot of dynamic things going on. How do you sample here? Because this is tricky. This is not a place you could easily tow gear.
Yeah. So it depends how close the walls are from each other. Yes, you can go there with the ROV, of course, and try to collect some animals. It depends on the walls and if it allows you. I'm remembering now that we actually deployed a lander in the Nazaré Canyon, and by the time we went there, to retrieve it, the lander never came back. Yeah, it's really hard. So I think you first have to study in detail how the canyon is, the morphology, and see where you can go with your gear. Either with a lander, either with a sediment trap, or with an ROV.
I accidentally did a transect with a lander. I think it might have been.
Wow!
It's probably one of the canyons you mentioned. It was one in the Bay of Biscay. The names escape me now. But yeah, it was during one of these flushing events, and I was measuring over 40 centimeters per second flow, and the lander was just being pushed along the seabed. And usually we've got loads of ballast and they hardly move.
Wow.
And this was real force. It traveled a long way.
But you managed to retrieve it, right?
Yeah. And then I got this amazing transect as my lander was like bashed along the current.
Wow. That's cool. I think it was a cruise with Alan in the Nazaré Canyon. Very early beginning, where I think he was doing some research together with Rachel Jeffries.
Oh, yes. Yeah, that was in the early days of Ocean Lab.
Yeah. And the lander never came up. So the experiment from Rachel, the lander never came up, and along with her samples. So it was kind of sad, of course.
It happens from time to time.
Yeah, I know. I know that.
Everything you put in the sea is temporary. Yeah. It's only on loan. Every time you get it back, you're lucky.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
What do you think are the big questions that still lay ahead? What are the big questions in canyon research?
I think they're still the same, aren't they? Like, we find out lots of things. We discovered lots of new things. We discovered there are really hotspots of biodiversity, but I think the questions are still there. How come the species or the organisms survive? How come these turbidity events happen? Like you can imagine why, or all of a sudden you have a snowball, dragging all the material down, and you can imagine these events to happen, but not to the turbidity, right? How? Why?
Yeah.
And how come these fauna survive? Like these things that I told you about the Holothurians. Suddenly, you go there and then they are not there. And if you only have one shot, and then you'd say, oh, canyons, they don't have anything, in terms, for instance, of sea cucumbers. And then if it happens that you go there again, and then you find like high densities of these, then you change your hypothesis. So this to tell you that because canyon research is very expensive, and if you have only one shot or two, you might conclude something, but then if you keep on going there, maybe, you conclude something else.
Yeah, we assume the snapshot that we get is accurate, but
yeah,
if you'd only gone to that canyon once, depending on when you go, it's either teeming with holothurians or it's empty.
Exactly. No, it's true. So I think there are a lot of questions. I think our questions, hypotheses that we have in canyons, I think they still exist because thanks to this European project, and I'm talking about the project that I was in, Hermes and the Hermione. We kind of covered a lot of research in canyons, but it was really, I think, the beginning. And then all of a sudden, I think you have still some people that manage to have canyon research. But then suddenly we have to move on. Like me, for instance, I love canyons. And if I could, I would immediately change my research back to canyons. But then, my research funds, are not there anymore.
Yeah, you can only lose so many landers before you run out of money. That's what we found.
Yeah, exactly. So I think the questions are still there, aren't they?
I agree. Still lots to do.
Multidisciplinary research on canyons again. And what I learned, it's not nice to only focus on biology. So you have to have a very multidisciplinary research. And you have to go on a multidisciplinary cruise, actually, to kind of understand what's going on there. So I learned that with all my cruises, and I was really lucky to have the geologists there. I learned a lot from the geologists, and they were always the first ones, to go in. And then we biologists would go there. So I tend to say that I'm not a biologist anymore. Because I try to answer my questions based, on a multidisciplinary context.
Nothing exists in a vacuum. They all inform each other.
Yeah. So you have to do it in a multidisciplinary way, I think. So that's what I learned. And ever since, I've been trying to focus my research in this matter. If for instance, I'm leading a project now, it's not deep sea, unfortunately. But it's coastal, and we managed to write it. And I try to invite people from all the disciplines, because I don't think you can answer your question, even though it's very ecological, cannot only have the biologists. So you have to have all disciplines with you. So that's what I learned thanks to canyons.
It's difficult it makes it such a difficult project to sort of fund, and there's lots of moving parts to it. But so often your biological context is answered by the geologists. You're wondering like, why is this here? Why wasn't it over there? And then they'll just chime in with, well, this one's really old and that one hasn't existed long enough. And then that's it. That's the biological answer is answered by the geology.
And chemistry, because to analyze how old the organic material is, and you can use isotopes or fatty acids. And so I tend to say that now I'm a biochemistry ecologist. I wouldn't dare to say geo, but I need a geologist with me all the time, I think.
Everybody does. They need a geologist friend.
Yes, totally right.
We can edit this out if you don't want it to go out, but Alan did tell a story about one of the cruises that you were on. And when you were coming into port, did you once call a bar and say that...
Yes.
Say that you had a boat full of people who haven't drunk for 6 weeks, and if they can clear the bar, they'll make a fortune.
I was in Lisbon. Me being Portuguese, I was with a bunch of people in this cruise, and we had, I think, a night, so 2 days in the harbor. And then I was planning to go out, myself, to forget where I was and to be in land and to be in Lisbon, because at the moment I was living in England. So I was actually, I'm going to to my country. I want to go to a bar and to buy to have a drink. All of a sudden, I don't know how and why, I end up calling 20 taxis. I don't know how anymore. But yes, we went to a bar, and then I was the only Portuguese. So I went to the barman and I was very Portuguese. I would say, look, you are gonna be rich today because you have these people that they just want to drink. And it was a mixture of people, the old ones, so the ones that were, in the cruise, and the new ones that were coming in. So it was a mixture.
Oh, it was both.
Yeah,
It's both shifts.
and I was part of both. So and Alan as well, I think. Yeah, Alan was, and Ben was. So was part of one of the both cruises, and so it was weird. I said, look, I think I deserve free drinks all night because I'm I managed.
I've made you a fortune.
Yeah, and then I'm not going to mention names, but there were some people that were going back to the vessel with me, and they wanted to drink, but they they didn't know where, or they I think they were scared of not to know how to get to the vessel anymore. So they asked me to write with a pen, in their hands, all the arms.
Oh, so they can just hold it up to a taxi?
Yeah, the address of where the vessel was. And it was hilarious.
No, that's smart.
Yeah, it was.
That's some engineering.
It was really cool. I was like, yeah, because you can lose the paper.
Yeah. If lost, please return to.
Yeah, and you could have lost me. I was not going to drag the new people, to the vessel, or the ones that would stay with me. So yeah, I think I wrote three times the address in 3 different sciences, and it was.
You labelled all the foreigners.
Where to go.
That's a lot of fun.
Yeah. But it was great fun. I forgot this event.
Well, I'm glad you could bring that out. But I really agree with you. No matter how busy I am or how jet lagged I am, that first bit of social before you go to sea, I think is really, really important. Because these are people who you're going to be asking favors of, who you're going to be doing things that annoy, you're going to be taking up their space or chewing too loudly and things like that. And it really makes a big difference if you can become friends first. And then it's far easier to ask for help or for them to tell you if you're doing something wrong and unknown people.
True. I remember that after that, after a few hours, so we all managed to go back to the vessel. And after a few hours, I had a sample. And I remember to offer to the crew members coffee. I was like, I will make you really good coffee because they would be the ones out with me, to collect the sample. And I don't think they were on that bar. They were in a different bar. But they were all telling me that it was my fault that I had to be out not to collect that sample. Oh. And so I was like, promised them and Ben really nice coffee, really good and strong coffee. And I remember to apologize them. So one thing that I learned also with my experience that is good to be friends with the crew. They are the ones.
Oh, absolutely.
They are the ones that actually are responsible for your samples. So you really have to go along with the crew. So.
And it's their house. We might have a 6-week cruise and we say that that's a long time, but they might have 6 to 9 months. So we are guests in their house.
Exactly. So that's what I also learned. And I remember that, I had to make really nice coffee for everybody.
Yeah, you got to live up because you're hungover too.
Yeah. But I managed. I felt responsible. I don't know how to explain it, but I felt responsible for all the people in the bar. So although I had free drinks, I didn't drink as much as I wanted to because I felt responsible for everybody. I don't know how to explain.
You got them there.
Yeah. So I was the one to be blamed.
Yeah.
But yeah, I kind of forgot all of that. Thank you.
I like that story. There's some lessons in there as well, but there's some good fun drinking in there too.
Yeah. It was good. Thanks, Alan.
Thank you so much, Teresa. Thanks for having a chat.
Yeah, no problem. It was a pleasure.
She did tell the story about clearing out the bar.
Nice. That was a good night, that.
What a legend.
Yeah, a lot of things happened that night. I can't really repeat them on here, but it was very funny. The winding up of there were school teachers on those cruises, I believe, and they were quite green and all very excited doing the science stuff. And then turned up that very night and met everyone who was getting off, who were maybe had a couple of drinks, and they were looking rather nervous as to what they'd got themselves in for, and they were winding them up something rotten. It was really funny. We shouldn't do that; it's cruel, but it was very funny.
It's a form of endearment.
Lisbon, I believe it was.
Good night out in Lisbon.
Yeah, Lisbon's one of those places that always gets a bit messy, isn't it? Oban and Lisbon and Tokyo, those are the big three.
Yeah, they get rowdy. We don't talk about Bergen.
I do. I tell everyone about your time in Bergen, but that's standard issue deep sea folklore now.
We're gonna be hearing a lot more about current canyon research because there is the InSize conference going on in December. Anyway, the big international conference for canyon systems is taking place in the next couple of months, and so we might do a little bit of coverage of that. It is also going on here in Wellington, so there'll be people here in bars that maybe I can accost with a microphone and ask them about the conference.
Speaking of canyons, we're situated right next to Perth Canyon. We'll be walking in Perth Canyon quite a lot when the guys go out in a couple of weeks. That's where one of our observatories is at the bottom of the canyon.
Oh, cool.
Perth Canyon's pretty cool. Nice big old canyon.
Are they back in now?
The first one's been out and back in again. Took some nice pictures. Sediment track worked beautifully, 5,000 metres.
Oh, nice.
And the second one's going to come out and get put back in again in a couple of weeks.
Sweet.
And then just keep doing that until we get bored or everyone dies.
Well, it becomes a long-term observatory and outlives us all.
Ah, that's quite pleased.
It's handy having that on your doorstep.
Yeah.
We used to have to travel a long way for deep bits. Now we live next to them.
Well, yeah, this ship we're using is tiny and you can razz out in a matter of hours and you get to 4,000 metres of water and
we're spoiled.
Do a wee job and then come back again. We're actually going to service the next one on the quayside and then take it back out. It's that close. Too easy, that's what I say.
Take some of the thrill out of it.
Yeah, too easy.
I used to like the days when all of my equipment would be lost and I'd have to build it quickly as soon as we got there. Yeah. Remember, I just used to always pack loads of spare parts and I'd essentially have to rebuild it.
That's the reason why all your stuff got lost, because your bags were full of circuit boards.
Yeah, I have very suspicious looking bags, it's fair. And that concludes this episode of the Deep Sea Podcast. We have a supporters page, and thank you so much for anyone who helps us keep the show going. We've got lots of ways to help the show, from the free, like leaving a review or subscribing or just yelling at your friends about it, or put it on in the car. Put it on in the car when you've got people like hostages, basically, passengers, just subject them to this. Hi, passengers. To things like becoming a patron or buying the merch, but it really helps to keep the show going. So there'll be a link to all those in the show notes. And to wrap up this episode, we'll deep see you next time, and I miss you already. If you would like to advertise with the Deep Sea Podcast, feel free to get in touch. Our audience is primarily young people with an interest in science, often undergraduates or people considering a degree in marine science, but it also includes established scientists. Feel free to get in touch if you're interested in reaching these groups.
I'm trying to look for a news item that's called Captain Barnacles, isn't it?
A particular one?
No, just generally. Just wanting to know that.
Just seeing what he's up to. Your rival.
Yeah. See where he is. Look at his social media and see if I can figure out what continent he's on.
Figure out his patterns so you know when to jump him.
I think to catch a polar bear, you've got to start thinking like a polar bear, which I presume means you have to go north. Like being in Australia, it's probably not the best place to go looking for polar bears. But this guy seems to travel the world, though. This is not a normal polar bear. This guy's Captain Barnacles. He's
getting a bit terrestrial as well. He's getting outside of his lane.
Do you think?
Yeah, they sort of did some Amazon specials, and now he's bayous and swamps and things. Yeah, he's encroaching on your territory, man. You might just see him striding up the beach one day. Jameson.
That's not how he speaks.
Calling you out. He takes his hat off and throws it to the sand. Jameson.
I'd go toe to toe with that bear any day.
Any day, fella, any day.
Yeah, I'll fight him on the beaches.
Fall into the Churchill speech.
Yeah. I'll take that polar bear down anywhere.